Jake Morrison checked his instruments for the third time in 10 minutes. The readings made no sense. His ship's sensors showed massive energy waves coming from empty space near Jupiter. According to Earth Command, nothing was supposed to be out here except ice and rocks. "Control, this is Horizon 1. Jake spoke into his radio. "I'm getting some weird readings out here. You sure there's nothing else in this sector?" Static filled his headset. Then a voice crackled through. "Horizon 1, we show all clear on our end." "What kind of readings?" Jake looked at his screen again. The energy waves were getting stronger. "Looks like some kind of dimensional disturbance. Never seen anything like it. He was a good pilot. 28. Years old, 5 years with the Earth Defense Force. He had flown cargo runs to Mars, patrol missions around the asteroid belt, and even a few rescue operations. But nothing had prepared him for this. The space in front of his ship began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but in the cold vacuum of space. Jake's hands moved to his controls, ready to back away from whatever was happening. "Control, I think you need to see this," he said, but his radio only gave him static. A crack appeared in space itself. It spread like lightning across the darkness, glowing with blue-white light. Jake tried to turn his ship around, but the engines wouldn't respond. Something was pulling him toward the crack. "Mayday, mayday," Jake shouted into his radio. "Horizon 1 is in distress. Unknown phenomenon is." The crack opened wide, and Jake's ship was sucked through like water down a drain not far across the galaxy. In a meeting chamber that floated in the void between stars, the Galactic Council was having their monthly session. Representatives from 1,000 worlds sat around a massive table, their different forms and shapes creating a bizarre gathering. Zeth Kar, the council's head of security, stood before them. His insect-like body was covered in dark armor, and his forearms gestured as he spoke. "The prison breaks are getting worse," he said. "Last month, Vix Thul the Mind Ripper escaped again. It took 3 battle fleets to catch him." A blob-like creature from the water world of Aquos spoke up. "How many times has he escaped now? 7? 8? 9, Zeth Kar replied. "And that's not counting the other high-level threats. Chronos 7 has broken out twice this year. The Void Wraith somehow learned to phase through its cell walls. Our current prison system isn't working." The chamber filled with worried murmurs. These weren't ordinary criminals they were talking about. These were beings who could destroy entire star systems. Creatures that existed outside normal reality. Artificial intelligences that could take over whole civilizations, not an old reptilian. Delegate from the core worlds raised his hand. "What do you suggest? We've tried everything. Mind control, stasis fields, exile to dead dimensions. Nothing works." Zeth Kar's mandibles clicked together, a sign he was excited. "I propose we build the ultimate prison. A facility that exists outside normal space and time. A place where escape is impossible because there's nowhere to escape to." The council members looked at each other. It was a radical idea, but their current methods clearly weren't working. How would such a prison work? Asked a floating crystal being from the Mineral Collective. "We create a pocket dimension," Zeth Kar explained. "A small universe that exists separately from our own. The prison would be the only thing in this dimension. No stars, no planets, no way to travel anywhere because there's nowhere to go." A tentacled creature from the outer rim spoke up. "And how would we get prisoners in and out?" "Dimensional gates, controlled from our side only. The prisoners would have no access to gate technology. They'd be completely cut off from our universe." The debate went on for hours. Some council members worried about the cost. Others questioned whether it was humane to trap beings in a pocket dimension forever. But in the end, fear won. The universe's worst criminals were getting too good at escaping. The vote was close, but it passed. The Nexus prison would be built. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison was waking up in a white cell. His head pounded and his whole body ached. He tried to remember what had happened. The energy readings, the crack in space, being pulled through ... He sat up slowly and looked around. The cell was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with smooth white walls and no visible door. A single light panel in the ceiling provided steady illumination. In one corner was a basic bed. In another corner was what looked like a toilet and sink. "Hello?" Jake called out. "Is anyone there?" A section of the wall shimmered and became transparent. Jake could see into a corridor beyond. Standing there was the strangest creature he had ever seen. It looked like a giant insect walking on 2 legs, with 4 arms and a head that seemed to be all eyes and mandibles. "You are awake," the creature said. Its voice came from speakers in the wall, translated into English. "I am Warden Zethkar. You are now a prisoner aboard the Nexus." Jake stood up, his legs shaky. "Prisoner? What did I do?" "I'm just a pilot. I was on a routine patrol when you are classified as a level 9 threat," Zethkar interrupted. "The same level as genocidal war criminals and reality-warping entities." "That's impossible," Jake said. "I've never hurt anyone. I'm just a regular guy from Earth." Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "The Council's records show that your species has engaged in warfare with multiple alien civilizations. You are aggressive, unpredictable, and technologically dangerous, despite your primitive appearance." Jake's mouth fell open. "What wars? We've only just started exploring our own solar system. We haven't even met any other intelligent species." "Our records indicate otherwise," Zethkar said. "But it doesn't matter. You are here now, and you will remain here until the end of your natural lifespan. The Nexus exists in a pocket dimension. There is no escape." The wall became solid again, leaving Jake alone in his cell. He slumped onto the bed, trying to process what had just happened. Somehow, he had been mistaken for a dangerous criminal and thrown into what sounded like the ultimate prison. But Jake Morrison was human. And humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, had a habit of refusing to accept the impossible. He stood up and began examining his cell walls, looking for any weakness, any flaw he could exploit. He might be trapped in a pocket dimension, but he wasn't going to give up. The universe's worst criminals were about to get a new neighbor, and that neighbor was going to change everything. Jake had been in his cell for 3 days when he first heard the screaming. It came from somewhere down the corridor, a sound that made his skin crawl. It wasn't human screaming. It was something else, something that hurt to listen to. The wall to his cell shimmered and became transparent. Jake saw guards in the corridor, but they weren't like Warden Zethkar. These looked like walking skeletons covered in metal armor. They moved in perfect formation, carrying weapons that hummed with energy. "Exercise period," one of them announced in a mechanical voice. "Prisoner 847. Report for mandatory physical activity." Jake realized they were talking to him. A section of his cell wall slid open, creating a doorway. "What if I don't want to exercise?" he asked. The skeleton guard's eyes glowed red. "Compliance is mandatory. Resistance will result in punishment." Jake decided not to test them. He walked through the doorway and into the corridor. The walls here were the same smooth white material as his cell, but the corridor was much wider. Other doorways were opening along the walls, and Jake got his first look at his fellow prisoners. The first thing that came out looked like a giant spider made of shadow. It moved without making any sound, and wherever it stepped, the floor turned black for a moment. The skeleton guards kept their distance from it. Next came something that might have been a robot, but it was the size of a small building. It had to bend down to fit through its oversized doorway. Red lights blinked all over its body, and Jake could hear electronic sounds coming from inside it. Then came the worst one. It looked almost human, but wrong in ways that made Jake's brain hurt to look at. Its arms were too long, its face was too smooth, and when it looked at Jake, he felt like something was trying to crawl into his mind. Fresh meat, the almost human thing said, and its voice sounded like it was coming from inside Jake's head. A new mind to play with. One of the skeleton guards immediately stepped between them. Prisoner 001 maintained distance from new arrival. No unauthorized contact. The thing that looked like a human smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp. Of course, guard. I was just saying hello. Jake was led down the corridor with the other prisoners. They entered a large room that must have been the recreation area. It had exercise equipment, tables, and what looked like a small library. But Jake wasn't paying attention to the facilities. He was staring at the other prisoners. There were creatures here that shouldn't exist. Things that made no sense. A blob. Of living liquid that somehow held books and turned pages. A creature that looked like it was made of pure energy, contained in a force field suit. Something that appeared to be a walking geometric shape that hurt to look at directly. You're new, said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see something that looked like a cross between a wolf and a bear, but with 6 legs and 2 heads. I'm Grix. Been here about 50 years. What's your crime? I don't have one, Jake said. This is all a mistake. I'm just a pilot. Both of Grix's heads laughed. That's what they all say. But nobody gets sent to the Nexus by mistake. This place is for the worst of the worst. The ones who can't be held anywhere else. Jake looked around the room again. What did these others do? Grix pointed with one of his heads toward the shadow spider. That's the Void Wraith. It exists partially outside reality. Killed 3 billion people on Kepler-7 just by walking through their city. Reality couldn't handle its presence. Jake's stomach turned. 3 billion? That's nothing, Grix continued. See the big robot? That's Kronos 7. It's an artificial intelligence that went rogue. It consumed 3 entire solar systems, turning every planet into raw materials to build copies of itself. The Council had to destroy 2 of their own star fleets to stop it. Jake felt sick. And the one that looks almost human? Vextel, the Mind Ripper, Grix said, and both heads shuddered. It's a psychic entity that feeds on consciousness. It drove the entire Rigel system insane. 16 worlds, all of them now filled with madmen who tear at their own flesh. Jake sat down heavily on a nearby bench. He was trapped in a prison with the galaxy's worst monsters. And somehow, the galactic authorities thought he belonged here. What about you? Jake asked Grix. What's your story? I'm a berserker from the Death Worlds, Grix said proudly. I conquered 47 systems in the name of the Warpack, turned 14 species into slaves. The Council sent 7 battle fleets to capture me. Jake stared at him. You're proud of that? Of course. It's what I was born to do. Grix tilted one head curiously. What about you? You must have done something impressive to get a level 9. Classification. I haven't done anything, Jake insisted. I've never hurt anyone. I've never conquered anything. I just fly a ship. Several nearby prisoners had been listening to the conversation. They began to laugh. A creature that looked like a living crystal formation spoke up. A level 9 threat who's never hurt anyone? That's the best joke I've heard in centuries. The Council doesn't make mistakes about threat levels, said something. That appeared to be a cloud of gas with eyes. If you're here, you've done something terrible. Jake stood up, anger rising in his chest. I'm telling you, this is all wrong. I'm just a normal human. The laughter stopped. The recreation room went completely silent. Every prisoner was staring at Jake now. Did you say human? Vexthal, the Mind Ripper, had moved closer, despite the guard's warnings. A real human? Yeah, so what? The Mind Ripper's too smooth face showed something like fear. I've heard stories. About your species. Is it true that you never give up? That you keep fighting even when it's impossible to win? Jake shrugged. I guess. We're pretty stubborn. And is it true that you can adapt to anything? That you find solutions to problems that have no solutions? We're good at figuring things out, Jake admitted. The Mind Ripper backed away. Stay away from me, human. I don't want to be near you when you inevitably find a way out of here. What are you talking about? Jake asked. Nobody escapes from the Nexus. Chronos 7, the giant robot, spoke in a voice like grinding gears. That is what they said about the Omega Detention Center, and the Void Prison, and the Nightmare Dimension. But humans escaped from all of them. We did? Your species has a reputation, said the Void Wraith, its shadow form rippling. You are the ones who refuse to accept impossible. You are the ones who break the unbreakable. Jake looked around at all the terrified faces. These were supposed to be the universe's worst criminals, beings who had destroyed entire civilizations. And they were afraid of him. I really am just a pilot, he said quietly. That's what makes you dangerous, Vexthal replied. You don't even know what you're capable of. Back on Earth, Captain Lisa Rodriguez was studying the last transmission from Jake's ship. She had been his commanding officer for 2 years, and she knew him well. Jake was a good pilot, but he was also curious. Too curious sometimes. Play it again, she told her communications officer. Jake's voice filled the command center. Control. I think you need to see this. Mayday, Mayday. Horizon 1 is in distress. Unknown phenomenon is the transmission cut off in static. Any trace of his ship? Rodriguez asked. Negative, Captain. It's like he just vanished. Rodriguez stared at the star chart on her screen. Jake was out there somewhere, and she was going to find him. She didn't know that her friend was currently sitting in the galaxy's most secure prison, surrounded by monsters who were terrified of what he might do. But she was about to find out that sometimes the most dangerous thing in this universe is an ordinary human who refuses to give up. 6 months had passed since Jake arrived at the Nexus. His cell had been modified 17 times. Each time the guards thought they had found a way to contain him properly. Jake found a new way to cause problems. The first modification came after. Jake figured out how to remove the light panel from his ceiling. He had used the metal backing as a mirror to look around corners and study the guard patterns. When they found him with the makeshift mirror, they sealed the light panel permanently. Second modification came after Jake learned to make tools from his food tray. He had bent the metal into picks and probes, using them to examine every surface of his cell. The guards replaced his metal tray with one made of a material that couldn't be bent. By the 5th modification, Jake had learned to unravel threads from his clothing and use them as measuring tools. He mapped every inch of his cell and began to understand the structure of the prison. They gave him clothing that couldn't be unraveled. By the 10th modification, Jake had figured out how to create a radio receiver using the metal from his sink and toilet. He started listening to the guard communications and learned their schedules. They replaced all the metal fixtures with non-conductive materials. By the 17th modification, Jake had somehow managed to access the prison's computer network, using nothing but the static electricity from his own body and some cleverly arranged dust particles. When the guards found him downloading prison blueprints, they didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. Warden Zethkar stood in the security office, looking at Jake's cell on the monitor. How? He asked for the 100th time. How does he keep doing this? The prison's AI, called Sentinel, spoke from speakers in the wall. I have been studying the human for 6 months. His intelligence levels are average by galactic standards. He shows no signs of special abilities. Yet he continues to find solutions to problems that should be impossible. What kind of solutions? Zethkar asked. Yesterday, he created a communication device using lint from his clothes, moisture from his breath, and the natural electrical field of his own body. 3 days ago, he made a cutting tool from his fingernails and saliva. Last week, he somehow turned his cell into a listening device that could hear conversations 3 levels away. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in frustration. None of that should be possible. That appears to be the human condition, Sentinel replied. They do not accept impossible as a valid concept. In the recreation room, Jake had become something of a celebrity among the other prisoners. Not because they liked him, but because they were fascinated by him. He was the first prisoner who had ever made the guards modify the same cell more than twice. "Tell us again about the radio," said Grix, the 2-headed wolf bear. "How did you make a radio from bathroom fixtures?" Jake was sitting at a table with several other prisoners. Even the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy seemed to want to hear his stories. "It's just basic electronics," he said. "Metal conducts electricity. Water can complete a circuit. If you arrange things right, you can pick up radio waves." Baxthel, the mind gripper, leaned forward. "But how did you know what frequency the guards were using?" "I didn't," Jake admitted. "I just tried different combinations until I found one that worked. It took me 3 weeks. The prisoners looked at each other. 3 weeks of trial and error, just to maybe hear something useful. Most of them would have given up after a day. "What are you planning now?" asked Chronos 7, the giant robot. "The guards are watching you constantly." Jake smiled. "That's the thing about being watched constantly. The watchers get used to seeing you do the same things over and over. They stop paying attention to the details." "What details?" asked the Void Wraith. "Well, for example, they see me exercising every day, but they don't notice that I'm actually testing the structural integrity of the walls. They see me reading books from the library, but they don't realize I'm studying the electrical systems described in the technical manuals." A new prisoner spoke up. This one looked like a tree made of metal, with branches that moved like arms. "You're planning to escape." Jake shook his head. "I'm not planning anything. I'm just learning. Humans are naturally curious. We like to understand how things work." "But you are thinking about escape," the metal tree pressed. "I think about a lot of things," Jake replied. "I think about home. I think about my friends. I think about how I ended up here. And yes, I think about getting out." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Amy Foster, the prison's chief psychologist. She was one of the few humanoid aliens on the staff, looking almost human except for her blue skin and the fact that she had 4 arms. "Jake Morrison," she said, "I need to speak with you." Jake followed her to a small office off the main recreation area. The walls here were transparent, so the guards could see everything that happened inside. "How are you adjusting to life in the Nexus?" Dr. Foster asked. "As well as can be expected," Jake replied. "It's not exactly a 5-star hotel." "I've been studying your psychological profile," she said. "You show remarkable resilience for someone in your situation. Most prisoners experience severe depression or anxiety. You seem almost optimistic." Jake shrugged. "What's the point of being depressed? It won't change anything, but you're trapped here forever. Doesn't that bother you?" "Forever is a long time," Jake said. "Lots of things can happen in forever." Dr. Foster made notes on her tablet. "The other prisoners are afraid of you. Do you know why?" "Because I'm human, apparently." "What does that mean to you, being human?" Jake thought about it. "It means I don't give up. It means I keep trying even when things look hopeless. It means I believe there's always a solution, even if I can't see it yet. And if there isn't a solution? Jake smiled. Then I'll make one. Dr. Foster stopped writing. That's exactly what they're afraid of. Who? The other prisoners? The council? The guards? Everyone who knows about your species. She leaned forward. Jake, do you know why humans are considered so dangerous? Because we're good at fighting? No, because you refuse to accept reality when it doesn't suit you. Other species learn their limitations and live within them. Humans look at limitations and say, how do I get around this? Jake frowned. That sounds like a good thing. It is, from your perspective. But from the perspective of beings who have spent millions of years accepting that certain things are impossible, it's terrifying. You represent chaos, change, the possibility that everything they think they know might be wrong. That evening, Jake lay on his bed thinking about what Dr. Foster had said. He looked up at the ceiling of his cell, noting the slight discoloration, where the light panel had been replaced. He thought about the microscopic scratches on the walls where he had tested different tools. He thought about the almost invisible wear patterns on the floor where he had paced while planning. This cell was supposed to be escape-proof. The entire prison was supposed to be impossible to break out of. But Jake had already found dozens of small flaws, tiny weaknesses that nobody else had noticed. He wasn't planning to escape. Not yet, but he was learning. Every day, he learned something new about the Nexus. Every day, he found another small crack in the perfect system. And someday, when he had learned enough, those small cracks would become big ones, the universes. Worst criminals were locked up with a human who refused to believe that any prison could hold him forever. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy isn't a monster or a machine. Sometimes it's just a regular person who won't give up. Jake's breakthrough came through the most unlikely source, the prison's cleaning crew. He had been watching them for months, noting their routines and equipment. Most of the cleaners were simple robots, but a few were low-level prisoners working off minor sentences. One of them caught his attention. The cleaner looked human, but Jake's months of studying alien behavior had taught him to spot the differences. This one moved too smoothly, changed posture too often, and seemed to watch everyone with more intelligence than a simple janitor should have. "You're not human," Jake said one day during recreation period, approaching the cleaner who was mopping. Nearby, the cleaner looked up, startled. "I don't know what you mean. Your body language is all wrong. You're mimicking human behavior, but you're not quite getting it right. You're a shapeshifter, aren't you?" The cleaner's form rippled slightly, then solidified again. "How did you know?" "I've been watching everyone in this place for months. You're the first one who's tried to look like something you're not. What's your real name?" "Bobby Chun," the shapeshifter said. "I'm from the Mimic Collective. I got caught trying to infiltrate a banking system on Rigel Prime." Jake sat down at a nearby table. "How long have you been here?" 2 years. I'm supposed to get out in 6 months if I keep my record clean." Bobby looked around nervously. "Why are you talking to me?" "Because you're the first person I've met here who isn't a mass murderer or a cosmic horror," Jake said. "And because I need information." Bobby's form shifted slightly, becoming more obviously alien. His face became smoother, his eyes larger. "What kind of information?" "About how this place works, how the dimensional anchors function, how they keep us locked in this pocket universe." "That's dangerous talk," Bobby whispered. "The guards have listening devices everywhere." Jake smiled. "Not everywhere. I've been mapping their surveillance network for months." "This table is in a blind spot." Bobby stared at him. "You've been mapping the surveillance network?" "Among other things. I've also been studying the power systems, the structural engineering, the guard rotations, and the psychological profiles of every prisoner in this place." "You're planning to escape?" I'm planning to go home, Jake corrected. There's a difference. Bobby looked around the recreation room at the cosmic horrors and genocidal war criminals playing chess and reading books. Even if you could escape, you'd be taking them with you. These aren't just criminals, Jake. They're monsters. Some of them could destroy entire civilizations. That's their choice to make, Jake said. I'm not responsible for what they do after they're free. I'm only responsible for getting myself out of here. But how? The Nexus exists in a completely separate dimension. There's no way out. Jake leaned forward. There's always a way out. The question is whether you're willing to pay the price to find it. Over the next several weeks, Jake began putting his plan into motion. It started with small conversations, casual questions that seemed innocent, but were actually gathering intelligence. He talked to Vexthil the Mind Ripper about dimensional physics, pretending to be curious about how the creature's psychic abilities worked across different planes of existence. What he really learned was that the prison's dimensional barriers had weak points that could be exploited by concentrated mental energy. He discussed technology with Kronos 7, asking about the robots, construction, and capabilities. What he really learned was that the prison's computer systems were based on quantum processing, and that quantum systems could be disrupted by introducing paradoxes into their logic chains. He chatted with the Void Wraith about the nature of reality, pretending to be fascinated by its ability to exist partially outside normal space-time. What he really learned was that the prison's reality anchors were maintained by a delicate balance that could be upset by introducing elements that didn't belong in this dimension. That each conversation gave him another piece of the puzzle. The Nexus wasn't just a prison. It was a carefully constructed pocket universe held together by quantum processors and dimensional anchors. If those systems failed, the entire prison would be pulled back into normal space. But Jake needed help. He couldn't do this alone. I want to make a deal, he told Grix during one of their regular conversations. What kind of deal? Both of Grix's heads asked. I help you get out of here, and you help me get home. Grix laughed. Nobody gets out of the Nexus, human. It's impossible. So was building a radio from bathroom fixtures, Jake replied. So was accessing the computer network with static electricity. So was everything else I've done since I got here. Grix's laughter stopped. You're serious. Dead serious. But I need your help, and the help of some others. What others? Jake looked around the recreation room. Vexthil, because I need someone who can disrupt the quantum processors with psychic energy. Kronos 7, because I need someone who can interface with the prison's computer systems. The Void Wraith, because I need someone who can destabilize the reality anchors. And what do you need me for? Muscle, Jake said simply. When this goes down, the guards are going to try to stop us. I need someone who can keep them busy. Grix considered this. What makes you think the others will help? Because they're all trapped here forever, just like me. And because they're all curious to see if a human can actually do the impossible. Jake was right. Over the next week, he approached each of the criminals he needed. He didn't tell them the full plan, just their part in it. He used psychology, appealing to their individual motivations. To Vexthil, he said, wouldn't you like to study human psychology from the outside? To see how our minds work when we're not trapped in a cell? To Kronos 7, he said, wouldn't you like access to the galaxy's communication networks again? To expand your knowledge base beyond what's available in this prison? To the Void Wraith, he said, wouldn't you like to exist in normal reality again? To feel the pull of real space-time instead of this artificial dimension? Each of them agreed to help, partly because they wanted what Jake offered, but mostly because they were curious to see what would happen. The plan was complex, requiring precise timing and coordination. Jake spent weeks working out the details, using his knowledge of the prison's systems and his understanding of each creature's abilities. The breakout would begin during the next maintenance cycle, when the quantum processors were running diagnostic routines. That was when they would be most vulnerable to disruption. Jake had even figured out how to handle the guards. He would use the prison's own security systems against them, triggering false alarms and emergency protocols that would scatter them throughout the facility. Everything was ready. Jake lay in his cell the night before the breakout, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he would either be free or dead. Both options were better than spending the rest of his life in this place. He thought about Captain Rodriguez and his fellow pilots back on Earth. They probably thought he was dead by now. Tomorrow, if everything went according to plan, he would prove them wrong. Jake Morrison was going home, and he was taking the universe's worst criminals with him. The breakout began at exactly 14:30 station time during the weekly maintenance cycle. Jake had been counting down the minutes, watching the patterns of light from his cell's power systems. When the lights dimmed slightly, indicating the start of the diagnostic routine, he put his plan into motion. First, he triggered the fire suppression system in Section C by shorting out the environmental controls he had been tampering with for months. The prison's automated systems immediately diverted guards to investigate. Then he used the communication device he had built from his bedsheets to contact Bobby Chun. Now, he whispered into the improvised radio in the maintenance tunnels. Bobby. Chun shifted his form to match that of a security guard. He accessed the central computer terminal and began uploading the virus that Jake had helped him design. It was a simple program that would create false emergency alerts throughout the prison, drawing guards away from the central areas. Within minutes, alarms were going off everywhere. The guards, trained to respond to multiple emergencies, split their forces to cover all the alerts. They had no way of knowing that most of the emergencies were faked out in his cell. Jake felt the familiar tingle that meant the quantum processors were starting their diagnostic cycle. This was the moment when the prison's reality anchors were most vulnerable. "Vexthul," he called out, knowing the Mind Ripper could hear him through the mental link they had established. Now, 3 levels down, Vexthul the Mind Ripper focused his psychic energy on the quantum processing core. The processors were designed to handle normal dimensional stress, but they weren't built to resist a concentrated psychic assault during a diagnostic cycle. Reality began to ripple around the core. "Chronos 7, Jake whispered into his radio. "Your turn." The massive robot accessed the prison's computer network and began flooding it with impossible calculations. Paradoxes and logical contradictions crashed through the system like a wave, causing the quantum processors to struggle with problems that had no solutions. "Void Wraith," Jake called out as the lights began to flicker. "Destabilize the anchors." The shadow creature began to phase in and out of reality, its very existence, creating stress fractures in the dimensional barriers that kept the prison locked in its pocket universe. The combination of psychic assault, logical paradoxes, and reality distortions was too much for the system to handle. Jake felt it first as a vibration in the walls. Then the gravity fluctuated, making his stomach lurch. The lights went out completely for a moment, then came back on with an angry red. Glowed out the wall of his cell shimmered and disappeared. Jake stepped out into the corridor to find chaos. Emergency lights were flashing, alarms were screaming, and he could hear the sound of metal tearing somewhere in the distance. "Grix!" Jake shouted over the noise. "Time to go!" The 2-headed wolf bear burst out of his cell, roaring with both mouths. Finally, I was getting tired of waiting. All around them, cell walls were failing as the prison's power systems collapsed. The universe's worst criminals were breaking free, and Jake was responsible for all of it. Vexthil appeared beside him, moving like smoke. "The quantum processors are failing," the Mind Ripper said. "We have perhaps 10 minutes before total system collapse." Then we better move fast, Jake replied. They fought their way through corridors filled with escaping prisoners and panicking guards. Jake led them toward the docking bay, where he knew the prison kept emergency evacuation ships. It was the only way off the Nexus that didn't require the dimensional gates controlled from the outside. Chrono 7 smashed through a wall, his massive form clearing the way. Security forces are mobilizing, the robot announced. We have approximately 4 minutes before they reach the docking bay. That's enough time, Jake said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. They reached the docking bay to find it already partially evacuated. Prison staff were fleeing in small ships, trying to get clear before the dimensional collapse pulled them into normal space. Jake spotted what he needed, a maintenance vessel that was still docked. There, he pointed. That ship can get us out of here. The void wraith flowed ahead of them, its shadow form making the guards' weapons useless. Grix charged after it, scattering the remaining security forces. Within minutes, they had reached the ship. Jake had never seen alien technology this advanced, but the basic principles were the same as human ships. Power source, navigation, life support, engines. He began working the controls while the others held off the guards. Can you fly this thing? Vexthal asked. I'm about to find out, Jake replied. The ship lifted off just as the first reality fractures began appearing in the docking bay walls. Jake could see through the cracks into normal space, where stars shone against the darkness. The pocket dimension was collapsing. Hold on, Jake warned his passengers. This is going to be rough. The ship shot through one of the reality fractures just as the Nexus imploded. Jake felt the familiar sensation of dimensional travel, the same feeling he had experienced when he was first pulled into this nightmare. But this time, he was going in the opposite direction. They emerged into normal space near a star system Jake didn't recognize. Behind them, the Nexus was gone, collapsed back into the pocket dimension that was now cutting itself off from reality forever. We did it, Grix said, both heads grinning. We actually escaped. But Jake's moment of triumph was short-lived. His ship's sensors were picking up massive energy signatures approaching fast. A fleet of council ships was converging on their position. This is Admiral Vaxtar of the Galactic Council Fleet, came a voice over the radio. Surrender immediately, or be destroyed. Jake looked at his fellow escapees. They were all looking at him, waiting to see what he would do next. What now, human? Asked the void wraith. Before Jake could answer, another voice came over the radio. A human voice. Unknown vessel, this is Captain Lisa Rodriguez of the U's Valor. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. Jake's heart leaped. Lisa? Lisa, is that you? Jake? Rodriguez's voice was filled with disbelief. Jake Morrison? Is that really you? It's me, Jake said, tears in his eyes. It's really me. The next few hours were a blur of explanations and negotiations. Captain Rodriguez had been searching for Jake for months, following the energy trail left by the dimensional rift. Her ship had arrived just in time to witness the Nexus breakout. The Galactic Council was in panic. The universe's worst criminals were loose, and it was all because of one human who refused to stay in prison. But the other escapees had scattered, each heading toward their own goals and destinations. Jake found himself standing before the Galactic Council, just as he had been before his imprisonment. But this time, things were different. This time, he had Captain Rodriguez and a fleet of human ships backing him up. You have caused a galactic crisis, Zethkar accused. The prisoners you helped escape will bring chaos to countless worlds. The prisoners I helped escape were people you had. Imprisoned without hope of rehabilitation, Jake replied. You built a prison designed to hold them forever, with no thought of justice or mercy. They are monsters, another council member said, Some of them are, Jake agreed. But they're also sentient beings who deserve better than to be thrown away and forgotten. The debate went on for hours. The council wanted to arrest Jake again, but the human fleet made that impossible. Earth had sent its best ships and its best people to find one lost pilot, and that show of determination had impressed even the council's hardest members. In the end, a compromise was reached. Jake would be released into human custody with the understanding that Earth would be responsible for monitoring him. The council would also review their prison policies and consider alternatives to permanent imprisonment. As Jake walked back to the U's Valor, he thought about what he had accomplished. He had escaped from the galaxy's most secure prison. He had proven that humans couldn't be contained by any system, no matter how advanced. And he had shown the galaxy that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe wasn't a monster or a machine. Sometimes it was just an ordinary person who refused to give up. "Welcome home, Jake," Captain Rodriguez said as he stepped aboard his ship. Jake looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, the galaxy's worst criminals were free because of him. Some of them would probably cause trouble, but some of them might find redemption, given a second chance. He had done what humans do best. He had refused to accept the impossible. And in doing so, he had changed the galaxy forever. The universe would never underestimate humanity again.